Hey friend, Alex back with Audio Edges, and in this video I'm going to show you a simple mixing template setup that you can build that thousands of pros use successfully. All I wish back in the day is that someone sat down next to me, maybe we both had a coffee in the studio, and they just walked me through it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do for you today, and you're going to be well on your way to better organized sessions, better mixes, and I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks along the way. So let's jump in. This is Pro Tools, but you can use any DAW to set up a session just like this. It all just comes down to buses and routing. That's basically it. Input, output, a couple sends and returns along the way. I'm going to start by opening up some raw audio tracks so we can get this started. Let's look at drums. Here are some drum tracks. I'm going to bring those into my session. Here we are. I'm going to go on a smaller view so we can see it, and I'm going to color these all a color of my choice that I'm going to use every single time I do drums in the future. In this case, I like red for drums. That's my color. You can pick red or any color you want. I always like to start with drums because when I learned to mix on an SSL duality console, we always had the drums first at the left of the console and worked our way over. So I like to think of a mix in the same way, especially when viewing my mixer page in Pro Tools like the console itself. So let's go back and open up some bass tracks. We have bass. I'm going to add them to my audio files folder. Okay. And for me, I like to do bass as brown. Now I'm going to open up guitars, acoustic. And for guitars, I like green, GG. Electric. Now for the electrics, I'll do a slightly different color so I can differentiate them, but I'll still go with green. Be a lighter green. And finally, some vocals. And for my vocals, I like to do my lead vocal as neon pink just because it really stands out. And then I'll go with like a purple for the background vocals, something like that. Now, because we've got a mix going on, we don't need inputs. We're not recording. So I'll just set all these to no input. They just defaulted to various mics that I have set up. And as of now, everything's coming out 1 and 2. Now, I like to make a master fader, a stereo master fader, and make sure that it's here as well. This is just whatever I'm monitoring or what I'm hearing. And I might even name it monitor, just so that I'm very clear on what this actually is, because I'm not going to bounce from this track myself. I used to do that, but I tend to use some software like Sound ID Reference to calibrate my monitors and make sure I'm hearing my mix most accurately. I'll put that on the master, and I don't want to bounce that. Now, you can always bypass this plugin, but then you have to remember to do that. I just want to make this easy, so I'm going to end up sending everything to a mix bus, and that's going to be the mix that I bounce. Now let's go up to our drums and start setting up some really simple buses, okay? So we'll start by making sure our drums are in an order we like. Kick in, kick out. Then we'll do, let's go snare top, maybe here, snare bottom, snare trigger. I'll put those right after the kick. Let's go hi-hats. Ooh, I need that kick click up here. This is actually a stereo overhead track, and this is a stereo room track, so I'll rename those. We got kick, snare, hats, toms, overhead, room, and any other dubs or effects. And now I'm going to highlight them all and send them all to one place, which is going to be a stereo drum bus, okay? I'm just going to name this drum bus, and it's going to create an auxiliary track where all of these drums are feeding into. So this is where they all end up. This will control the volume of all drums. I could do processing on all the drums at once right here if I wanted to. And what I'll do is send the drum bus to a stereo instrumental track, or instrumental bus, we'll call it in this example. Now the drums are going into this instrumental bus. I'm going to go to my I/O setup and just default these buses again so that I'm not getting a weird instrumental bus 0.1 from renaming buses from other sessions. So rename that for clean naming. And my instrumental bus, I'm going to send to my mix bus where everything ends up. I'm going to solo safe this again. And I'm going to move the instrumental bus and mix bus to after our instruments, in this case, right after these guitars, and I'll put the mix bus after the vocals. I'm going to get the bass together and hold shift to select both, and then shift option to click the output, new track, stereo aux, and I'm going to name it bass bus. Now we have these bass guitars. Once we have a nice balance between those, I can control them both here. And our bass bus we will send to our instrumental bus. So you're probably understanding what's going on now. Our drums are going to an instrumental bus, bass to the instrumental bus to the mix bus. Let's do the same here with acoustic guitars. Okay, stereo, acoustic bus. I'm going to just call it acoustic bus, solo safe, and to our instrumental bus. There it is. And now we'll do the electric guitars as well. I'll call this electric bus, solo safe it, and again, that's because if I were to solo any individual instrument while I'm mixing, if this was not solo safed, it wouldn't actually solo. So I'll send the electric bus to my instrumental bus. And finally, we have our vocals, which I'll send to a stereo vocal bus. Solo safe it, and as you can guess, vocals are not instrumental. So I'm going to send my vocal bus to my mix bus. So this way I can control the volume of my vocals independently from my instrumental bus. You ever hear about doing a mix with vocals up 1 dB or vocals down 1 dB? Well, it's probably a lot easier to have these on separate buses and be able just to control them with a fader. Vocals down 1 dB, vocals up 1 dB. You can do your own automation separately. You can run some plugins and some glue just on the instrumental bus and then some on the mix bus altogether. I'll show you that in a second. Now, after I finished mixing my song, let's pretend I do some balancing, panning, add some things, I can now bounce at the end of my session. I'll highlight the song, and then I'll bounce my mix bus. And when I bounce from this mix bus, I'm bouncing my whole mix, but I never have to worry about this Sound ID reference plugin, or maybe I'm using something like VSX for my headphones. I will put that on the monitor bus. That's just monitoring stuff. There are some great emulations with modern technology that we can now use, and that I'll all do on my monitor out, which is just the master fader in Pro Tools. That's my little hack, and then I actually bounce my mix bus out. Now, when you bounce your mix, be very careful because you got to double check that everything is actually routed to your mix bus. Because if something is accidentally, let's say these electric guitars are accidentally going out 1 and 2, you forgot to route it to your instrumental bus, then you're going to bounce your mix, but you're not going to hear those electric guitars in the mix because you were hearing them out of your monitor the whole time. So before you even start mixing, check your routing, check you're all set up. So hopefully that's all pretty straightforward so far. Now we're going to set up some sends so that we're ready to add in some effects like reverb, maybe some things in parallel, and get you set up for some full, energetic, really lively mixes off the start. We'll head over to our mixer page to understand how this works. Let's set up our drum returns. Now, first thing we're going to want to do is have a drum reverb to send all of our drums to. So usually I don't send the kick. I don't find it usually needs much reverb. If anything, I'm adding some space to it with some type of drum soap or trigger or something like that. So I'm going to actually just highlight from the snare all the way down through the rest of the drums and add a send. Again, I'm holding Shift Option, a stereo send, and this one I'm going to call drum reverb. Okay? All these faders default to negative infinity, so I can just bring in the reverb on each track individually as I want. I'll solo safe the drum reverb, and I'm actually going to move it to the other side of my drum bus. I'm not going to route it to my drum bus. Now, this might seem a bit weird and counterintuitive, but the reason for me is after mixing enough songs, I realized I don't really like my drum reverb going into the glue that I'll typically put on my drum bus. Maybe I've put something like an SSL compressor on the drum bus. I don't always want my reverb going into this too. So I'll keep it next to my drum bus in parallel, and that way I can have the nice open full sounding reverb, but also get those squished sounding drums or glued drums if that's what I want to do. Now we're ready to send to a drum reverb. So I'm going to open up a reverb as a starting point. This here is Verb Suite. Let's just bring in a drum preset. This warm drum space is really nice. Okay, so these are some good starting points for us here. I might get a compressor ready on my drums and get a nice preset like this. And then I'll also maybe open up a clipper on my drums. These are all things that you'll find in my other tutorials. But I like to have some starting points in bypass just for that drum bus so I can go to those when I need them. Now, the sends here, I'm going to make a send off of my drum bus, and I'm just going to call it equals drums. Equal sign meaning parallel. You know, two lines in parallel. This is my parallel drums. This is where I'm going to crush my drums or squish my drums, okay? I'm going to send this at full unity gain, but what I'm going to do is bring the fader down to 0. So I can blend this in separately after I've got my balance of these drums and I've processed them all individually, okay? So that's my parallel drums, and on here I'm going to add something like maybe virtual mix rack. All I'm trying to do is get a big aggressive compression, saturation that's going to make these drums sound huge and really pop out. So here's one of my go-to settings for this. It's a preset I made called Drums Crush. This is heavily inspired by Chris Lord-Alge style drums. So you could use that, or maybe you just want to do some parallel compression, maybe something like H-Comp. Pumping drums is a really good preset. Make sure to set these plugins on wet if they start out being not fully wet. So now I've got some parallel compression set up that I can test out, A/B some of these, play around with the settings, and blend it in parallel like this. I'm not going to blend with this send fader here because that will actually change how much compression is being done. I want to be able to dial in my compressor and know that that compressor is acting as I have prescribed it to, and then I can just blend that in here with the return track, okay? Now you're probably seeing all of these getting a little messy with our output, so let's clean that up. What I like to do is send our drum bus, parallel drums, and drum reverb all to one new track. It's a stereo track, and I'm just gonna call it drum sum bus. And these are all going to one drum sum bus. Now I can control the volume of my drum bus. Let's say I got a really nice balance of the parallel drums and I got a really nice balance of my drum reverbs all the way I like them. Now, if for whatever reason I decide later on that all of my drums are too loud in my mix, I can just control them all here from the drum sum fader, where all of this is summing, okay? That I have to make sure to send to my instrumental bus. So you can tell setting up your drums is maybe a little bit more effort than some of the other instruments, but trust me, friend, it's really, really worthwhile. And I'm going to show you one trick for drums right now. Now, this song is a rock song. We got drums, distorted guitars, bass. You could probably tell by the types of tracks I was importing. But maybe you're someone that works on pop music or EDM music. In that case, you're going to have some type of probably big, punchy sounding kick sample. And what I find with those samples is they're pre-compressed. They typically have a really nice transient on them already. And if you are working on EDM or a very often pop music, what I would recommend for your kick track, let's just pretend this is like our pop kick, right? And these just don't exist for this example. We got our kick here. What I recommend if you are in pop or EDM is also test out not sending your pop kick to this drum bus because it's already compressed, it's already saturated, it's already transient. It's probably maybe a sample off a splice or something like that that you're using that already sounds good. You don't want to process it more. Send just your kick straight through to your drum sum bus. I find this is a serious trick for getting that punchy kick that sticks through the mix. We don't want to be compressing that with our drum bus, okay? So the drum bus in pop and EDM music, this is all stuff that I've only figured out after 10 years, you know? These are these little tricks that I'm trying to give you on this channel. So pop kick just can go straight through to drum sum bus. With rock music and live drums especially, like this is a live drum recording in this example here, okay? With these live drums, I'm going to want that sent to my drum bus where it's all going to be able to get glued together. I personally like the sound of a really nice glued together kit, you know, live drum kit. So that's the deal there. But one little trick for the pop and EDM folks out there, because I mix all genres and some things work better in other genres than they do in other genres. Let's have one more look here. We got our drums all going to our drum sum bus. We got our bass going to our bass bus. Acoustics going to our acoustic bus, okay? And in here, you're probably wondering, okay, maybe I'm going to do some reverbs or something like that. And you're absolutely right. So let's set up an acoustic reverb. Again, I'm doing a stereo send, and I'll call it acoustic reverb. So now these are ready for me to blend in as much as I need on each individual guitar part. And now you're probably wondering, okay, well, do I send now this acoustic reverb to my acoustic bus, or do I send it straight through to my instrumental bus? This is your question to answer, friend, because if you put a whole bunch of plugins processing all your acoustic guitars together on your acoustic bus, maybe you don't want these reverbs here. Maybe you just want to send your acoustic reverb off of your entire acoustic bus. And in that case, your acoustic reverb can be next to your acoustic bus, also going to your instrumental bus. That's the difference here. Now, if you're doing all individual processing on these acoustic guitars, and you may not be doing much on this acoustic bus, other than sending them somewhere which you can control them all by volume, in that case, maybe you want to put the acoustic reverb before so you can just send it to your acoustic bus and control everything here. Okay, so for this example, let's just open up maybe something like Little Plate and just get a plate reverb that we could send these guitars to. Awesome. Now this idea carries forward. Now on our instrumental bus, usually what I will do is have a couple plugins ready to go. Maybe it's a compressor like this FG Red from Slate Digital. I'll bring in a mix bus preset. And maybe it's just a tiny bit of linear phase multiband compression. Some engineers like to mix directly into these plugins from the beginning. I personally like to keep them off until I'm about 75% of the way through my instrumental mix. Then I'll turn them on and start dialing in some settings and be able to use those compressors. I'm always pretty subtle with my instrumental bus and my mix bus processing. I personally, as an engineer, like to get a really good balance of things individually and then just have a little bit of glue to hold them together. But if I've got my frequencies right and all of the individual instrument sections and they fit pretty well together beforehand, I find it works really well about 3/4 of the way through my mix just to flip on these compressors and dial in a little bit of compression on everything there. Now with vocals, I've got some great videos on mixing vocals in Pro Tools and how I do that, but essentially I'll probably set up a couple of reverbs similarly, and I'll have all of those ending up at the vocal bus. So let's set up, just as an example, vocal reverb. Solo safe, going to my vocal bus. And a stereo vocal delay. All these effects are always stereo. Going to my vocal bus. Maybe we go with repeater here as a delay. I'll grab this ambient lead vocal preset, and we'll grab Verb Suite for our vocal reverb. Let's put on this large hall. So I'm in good shape here already. Now I like to do parallel compression, parallel width on my vocals, so check out some vocal tutorials on this channel. I really don't think you'll be disappointed. I'm gonna give you all the sauce over there on how I, sauce up these vocals, but these are just a couple basic effects. You understand the template. Now if you have a lot of background vocals, you may want to send them all to a background vocal bus. I'll call this BG bus. And then send that background vocal bus to your vocal bus as well. In this case, with just these two, I probably wouldn't bother, but this is good if you have a lot of background vocals and you want to glue them all together. So one really good bus compressor for this is actually from Native Instruments, and this backing vocals preset, I like it a lot. So if you have a bunch of vocal stacks, you could glue them together all on a background vocal bus, send that bus to your vocal bus as well, okay? And we could even bring over these reverbs here onto that background vocal bus. But again, if you're not using a background vocal bus and you're sending these straight to your vocal bus, you would then just put the reverbs on the background vocals themselves. Okay, so that's how that's gonna work there. And finally, we've got everything sending to our mix bus. I'll turn my camera off so you can really see the inserts on the mix bus here. And what I like to typically do is have some type of tape plugin. So for me, this is gonna be the J37 from Waves, or virtual tape machines from Slate Digital is also a really good option. There's nothing like running your whole mix through some tape right at the end. I put both tape machines on so I can bypass one and test out the other, not to have both on at the same time. And you may notice I left 2 insert slots open up here before my tape. And that's because I may want to get my vocals in on some of this compression that I have going on my instrumental bus, which means maybe when I start my vocal mix, I might move some of these compressors over here. It just depends what my balance is like with my vocals and my drums especially, and seeing how those compressors are being hit and being able to hear them, whether or not I want that full glue on the mix bus or just on the instrumental bus first. So I will test out where I'm putting these compressors, whether it's just on instrumental, just on mix bus, maybe I'll even on my vocal bus add some plugins of its own. Our mix ends at our mix bus, which we can highlight our session and bounce. We're not going to bounce our master fader, which remember I renamed monitor, where we are having our monitoring plugins if you do use some type of calibration or maybe some type of mix check referencing software. Now, if at all you wondered, okay, the template's great, but now how do I get the instruments to actually sound good? I have a free gift that I think you're gonna love. It's my home mixing cheat sheet. It's 1 page, but it's a chart with all sorts of EQ and compression and even possible effects settings for all sorts of instruments, basically anything you could think of. Drums, bass, guitars, synths, strings, keys, vocals, pretty much everything is on there. And it has those settings for EQ, compression, even possible effects, so you can get those individual tracks sounding really, really good with the settings that pros will typically use. If you pair that cheat sheet with this template, friend, you're gonna be on your way to some amazing mixes right from home. It's absolutely free. The link will be at the top of the description, and if you enjoyed this video, it would honestly mean the world to me if you hit that like button, left a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm here to help you, so make sure to hit that subscribe button so we make sure to see each other again. That's all for today, friend, and I'll see you in the next one.